Every dawn, a single father stopped at the same street corner, helping an unfamiliar woman cross the road, carrying her bags, buying her a hot cup of coffee. He thought it was just anonymous kindness in a hurried city. Then one morning, she gripped his hand and whispered, "You saved my life once." Her face trembled with returning memory. Those words opened a door to the past, pulling him into a dangerous secret he never imagined he was part of. The coastal port city wore autumn like a familiar coat. Fog settling over the streets each morning as ship horns echoed across the harbor. In the financial district, glass towers caught the weak sunlight while just blocks away. Working-ass neighborhoods stirred to life with the rumble of buses and the shuffle of tired feet heading to early shifts. At the intersection of these two worlds stood Hale's Coffee, a modest corner shop with steamed windows and the perpetual scent of roasted beans drifting into the street. This was where Carter Flynn stopped every morning, where routine became ritual, where kindness became something more. Carter Flynn was 32 years old and carried himself with the quiet competence of someone who had seen enough of life's emergencies to remain calm through most of what followed. He worked as a handyman during the day, fixing what was broken in other people's homes, while his own small apartment remained a testament to functional minimalism. His daughter, Louisa, 7 years old with her mother's dark curls and her father's observant eyes, was the center of his universe. Before the toolbox and the odd jobs, Carter had worn a different uniform. He had been a firefighter, then a paramedic, someone who ran toward danger while others ran away. But that was before the metro tunnel, before the smoke and screams, before the guilt that settled into his bones and convinced him he was better suited to fixing leaky faucets than saving lives. The thin scar on his left wrist, pale against his skin, was a souvenir from his last day in service. He touched it sometimes without thinking, a nervous habit that Louisa had learned not to ask about anymore. These days, Carter's heroism was measured in smaller gestures. Each morning at 7:45, after dropping Louisa at the bus stop, he would walk 3 blocks to the intersection near Hale's Coffee. There, amid the rush of commuters and the aggressive honking of delivery trucks, he would find Alexandra. Alexandra Vivian Hale was 29. Though some mornings she felt decades older, she managed the family coffee shop, a small inheritance from a grandfather who believed in community and fair wages. Most days she arrived early, unlocking the doors while the city was still shaking off sleep. But crossing that particular intersection filled her with a dread she could not name. The sound of air brakes hissing, the screech of rubber on asphalt, the smell of exhaust mixed with something acrid she could not quite place. These sensory fragments triggered panic attacks that left her frozen on the curb, heart hammering, unable to move forward or back. That was when Carter had first noticed her 3 months ago. He had simply offered his arm, walked her across when the light changed, and said nothing about the way her hand shook or how she flinched at every sudden noise. The next day, he was there again, and the next it became their unspoken arrangement. He never asked why she needed help. She never explained. He would arrive, offer his arm, guide her across the busy street where delivery trucks often brake too hard, and buy her a coffee before continuing to his own day. Louisa, watching from the school bus window as it passed that corner, had begun drawing maps of the intersection in her notebook, marking the spot with a heart and the words, "Dad's morning mission." Alexandra always wore the same wine-colored wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Even as autumn began to warm toward winter's end, she kept one hand in her coat pocket, fingers wrapped around a steel keychain she had found in that same pocket 2 years ago after waking in a hospital with a splitting headache and gaps in her memory large enough to lose yourself in. The keychain was old, worn smooth with letters scratched into the metal that might have been CF or might have been nothing. Just random marks left by time and use. Her neurologist, Dr. Amanda Cross, had explained that the head injury from the accident had caused retrograde amnesia, fragmenting her memories of the weeks before and during the trauma. Some things might return, triggered by sensory cues. Others might stay locked away forever. But this morning was different. This morning, as Carter handed her the usual cup, black coffee with 1 sugar, A delivery truck jackkniffed at the intersection. The sound was catastrophic. Metal grinding against metal. The high-pitched shriek of failing brakes. The acrid smell of burning rubber mixing with something else. Something that made Alexandra's vision tunnel and her knees buckle. Carter caught her elbow, steadying her, and in that moment of contact, something shifted behind her eyes. She looked at him, really looked at him, and her pupils dilated with recognition. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist, her fingers finding the thin scar on his left wrist as if she had known it would be there. "You saved my life once," she said, and her voice cracked with the weight of returning memory. "I can smell it, the smoke. There were red lights flashing. Your hand was warm. You pulled me out of a subway car. The tunnel was full of smoke. I couldn't breathe, but you pulled me out." Carter felt the world tilt. 2 years ago, the metro tunnel fire. He had been on duty that night, one of the first responders into the smoke-filled underground. There had been so many people, so much chaos. Flames licking up the walls where they should not have been. The structural fire behaving like an accelerant fire. He had pulled people out until his captain ordered him back, until a secondary explosion had torn through the tunnel and sent a piece of shrapnel into his wrist. He remembered faces only as terror and soot. He remembered hands he had gripped, bodies he had dragged toward fresh air. He remembered the smell of burning plastic and something chemical. Something wrong. And he remembered the moment his partner had gone back in against orders and never come out. That was the day Carter Flynn stopped being a firefighter. The guilt of surviving, of leaving when ordered, of not being the one to die, had been too heavy to carry in uniform. So he had shed the uniform and told himself he was better off fixing broken pipes. But now this woman, this stranger he had been helping for months, was telling him that their connection went deeper than coincidence. She was telling him he had saved her before in the darkness and smoke, and the words opened wounds he had thought scarred over. "The keychain," Alexandra said, pulling it from her pocket with shaking hands. "I found it in my coat after I woke up in the hospital. It says, Confer. Is that you, Carter Flynn?" He stared at the worn steel. He had lost his keychain that night. He remembered it snagging on something, the chain breaking as he pulled someone free. He had never gone back for it. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's mine." The coffee shop behind them hummed with morning business, oblivious, the intersection filled and emptied with each traffic light cycle, and Carter Flynn realized that the past he had been running from had been waiting at this corner all along, patient and persistent, wrapped in a wine-colored scarf and asking to be remembered. Dr. Amanda Cross had kind eyes and a talent for delivering difficult truths gently. In her office 3 days later, she explained to Carter and Alexandra how trauma and memory worked, how the brain sometimes locked away what it could not process, creating gaps that sensory triggers could unlock. The brake sounds, the smell of smoke, even the texture of wool, she said, gesturing to Alexandra's scarf. Any of these could serve as keys to locked rooms in your memory. The fact that you crossed that intersection daily with Carter's helped create a safe repetition that eventually allowed your mind to risk remembering. But Alexandra's returning memories brought more than just recognition. She remembered being in the tunnel that day because she had been taking photographs for a planned renovation article. She remembered raising her camera, focusing on a section of tunnel near a maintenance access, and capturing the image of a man pushing a dolly loaded with drums. The drums had labels, a logo she had recognized even through the viewfinder. War Holdings, or more specifically, one of their subsidiaries, Ward Hazard Disposal. She remembered thinking it was odd, hazardous waste being moved through a metro tunnel, and she remembered snapping 3 more photos before the explosion hit. Her phone had disappeared in the chaos. When she woke in a hospital 2 days later, concussed and confused, her belongings had been returned minus the phone. Police Lieutenant William Porter had taken her statement, but it had been brief, confused, ultimately useless given her memory gaps. The investigation into the tunnel fire had been closed within a month, ruled an electrical failure and aging infrastructure. No one had mentioned hazardous materials. No one had followed up on the missing phone. "But I did see it," Alexandra insisted, sitting in Amanda's office with her hands clenched in her lap. "I know I did. And if those drums were flammable solvents, if someone was illegally transporting them through the tunnel to avoid proper disposal fees, then the fire was an accident. It was evidence disposal that went wrong. Henry Barnes, Carter's friend from his firefighting days, had left the department a year before Carter and gone into private investigation. He had the kind of practical cynicism that made him good at his job and the loyalty that made him good at friendship. When Carter called him, explained the situation, Henry listened without interrupting and then said, "You know, this is going to get ugly. If there's money involved, if someone with power was cutting corners, they're not going to want those photos found or that story told." "The photos are gone," Carter said. "But the memory isn't," Henry replied. "And memories can be corroborated. Let me look into the investigation files. Let me see what was officially recorded and what wasn't." What Henry found was absence. The fire inspection report was thorough in some ways and suspiciously vague in others. Burn patterns were documented, but not analyzed. The electrical failure theory was stated, but not tested. And 3 pages of the initial responding officer's notes were simply missing from the digital file marked as corrupted data. Lieutenant Porter's signature was on the closure report, but Henry knew Porter from the old days. He knew Porter as someone who took pride in thorough work. This sloppy close bothered Henry enough to drive to Porter's precinct and ask directly. Porter met him in a parking garage, the kind of location that told Henry everything he needed to know before a word was spoken. "The case was taken from me," Porter said, his jaw tight with old anger. 2 weeks in, I get called into a meeting with my captain and 2 lawyers from Ward Holdings. They had affidavit, expert testimony, pressure from the city about reopening the tunnel quickly for economic reasons. My captain told me to write the closure report. I wrote it, but I kept copies of everything I had collected before the case was pulled off the books in case it ever mattered. "It matters now," Henry said. Porter looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I always thought it mattered. I just didn't have enough to push back against that kind of money and influence. But if you've got someone who remembers what she saw, if you got the firefighter who pulled her out, maybe the story changes." The copies Porter provided told a different story than the official closure. They included radio transcripts from that night, including Carter's captain reporting a secondary explosion that smelled chemical, not electrical. They included the initial witness list, which had 23 names. The final report listed only 9. Alexandra Hale's name had been on the initial list, then removed with a note that said victim declined further participation. She had never declined. She had simply been concussed and forgotten. Carter sat in his kitchen after Louisa was asleep, reading through the documents Henry and Porter had compiled, and felt the old guilt shift in his chest. The partner who died, Marcus, had gone back into the tunnel because he heard screaming. The secondary explosion had happened 40 seconds after Marcus went in. 40 seconds. Carter had been outside, bleeding from his wrist, screaming at his captain to let him go back. The captain had physically restrained him. Marcus' body had been recovered 3 hours later, but according to the radio transcripts, the secondary explosion had been localized. It had originated near the maintenance access, exactly where Alexandra said she had photographed the hazmat drums. If Marcus had gone in from the main entrance, if he had been trying to reach the screaming Carter heard, he would have been nowhere near that explosion. Marcus had died for a different reason, and Carter had carried guilt for the wrong thing. He called Alexandra. It was late past 10, but she answered on the second ring as if she had been waiting. "I need to tell you something," he said about that night, about why I left the fire department. She listened as he told her about Marcus, about the guilt, about the years of thinking he should have been faster, braver, better. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You saved 23 people that night. According to the initial witness list, 23. And you think you failed because you couldn't save number 24. Carter. What if Marcus died because someone deliberately set a secondary charge to destroy evidence? What if he died because someone with money and lawyers decided that hiding illegal waste disposal was worth more than human life?" It was a shift in perspective that Carter had not allowed himself. He had made Marcus's death about his own inadequacy. But if Alexandra was right, if this was corporate negligence and cover-up, then Marcus' death was murder, and the person responsible was still out there, still protected by money and influence. The next morning, Carter noticed the black SUV. It was parked across from Hale's Coffee, tinted windows up, engine idling. It stayed there for 20 minutes, then pulled away as he and Alexandra finished crossing the street. The morning after that, it was back. Henry, when told about it, came by with a magnetic GPS tracker hidden in a coffee cup and casually walked past the SUV, bending down as if to tie his shoe. The tracker went under the rear bumper. By that evening, they knew the SUV was registered to a shell company that, when traced through 3 layers of paperwork, connected back to Ward Holdings. "They're watching you," Henry said flatly, "which means they know you're looking into this, which means we're on the right track, and we need to be very, very careful." But careful became complicated when Alexandra's Aunt Constance arrived at the coffee shop unannounced. Her usual composure cracked with worry. Constance Reed was 56, a co-founder of Hale's Coffee back when it was just one storefront and dream. She was tough, practical, fiercely protective of family. But standing in front of Alexandra and Carter, she looked frightened. "I need to tell you something," Constance said. 2 years ago, right after your accident, a lawyer came to see me. He said Ward Holdings wanted to express their condolences and help with medical bills. He offered a settlement, $20,000 in exchange for signing a release that said we wouldn't pursue any claims related to the tunnel incident. You were in the hospital, confused. Couldn't remember most of what happened. The bills were piling up. I thought it was a generous gesture. I signed. Alexandra stared at her aunt. "You took money to keep us quiet. I took money to keep you alive." Constance shot back. "Do you remember how much your hospital stay cost? How much the rehab and urologist visits cost? We're not rich, Alexandra. That settlement covered what insurance didn't. I thought it was kindness. I didn't realize it was a gag order until now." The legal document Constance produced was exactly what Henry feared. It was a broadly worded release that prevented any legal action against Ward Holdings or its subsidiaries related to any incident occurring in the metro system on that date. It was the kind of document corporations use to buy silence, and it worked because most people faced with medical debt and confusion took the immediate relief. "But you didn't sign it," Henry said to Alexandra. "Constance did. You were the injured party. It might not hold up. If we challenge it, it doesn't matter if it holds up," Carter said quietly. "They'll bury you in legal fees just trying to find out. That's the point. They don't have to win. They just have to make fighting back cost more than you can afford." They were sitting in the back room of Hale's Coffee, afternoon lights slanting through the dusty window when they heard the sound of breaking glass. The front window of the shop exploded inward, spraying shards across the counter. No brick, no rock, just a clean hole punched through the center. Carter was moving before he thought, pulling Alexandra and Constance down behind the counter, his old training screaming at him to assess, protect, respond. But the street outside was empty, except for the black SUV pulling away from the curb. The message was clear. "We can reach you. We can hurt you. Stop looking." That night, Carter sat on Louisa's bed after she had finally fallen asleep, stroking her hair and trying to quiet the fear screaming in his chest. The broken window was one thing. Lawyers were another. But what if Ward decided the problem was Carter himself? What if they decided a single father with no money and no powerful friends was easier to silence than to negotiate with? What if they went after Louisa the next morning? That fear materialized. Carter got a call from Louisa's school. A man had approached her at the playground, started asking questions about her father, about where they lived, what kind of car he drove. A teacher had intervened before the conversation went far, but the man had left a message. "Tell your dad to stop digging in old dirt." Louisa had relayed this with 7-year-old confusion, not understanding the threat. Carter understood perfectly. He called Alexandra, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "I can't do this. I can't put her at risk. They got close to my daughter. Do you understand? They threatened my daughter." Alexandra was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Meet me at the shop. Bring Louisa. We need to talk about ending this in a way that keeps everyone safe." When they arrived, Henry and Porter were already there. Amanda Cross had been called as well. They sat in a circle in the back room, and Alexandra laid out a plan that was either brilliant or insane. "We go public," she said. "Not through lawyers, not through official channels they can control. We hold a press conference right here in this shop. We tell the story. I talk about the fire, about my memories returning, about the photos I took. Carter talks about the rescue, about the inconsistencies in the investigation. Porter talks about the case being pulled. We make it so public, so visible, that silencing us becomes more expensive than letting the story run. We put in the light where everyone can see. They'll sue you into the ground, Henry said. Maybe. Alexandra agreed. But not before the story gets out. Not before people start asking questions. And if we have actual evidence, not just memories, they can't make it disappear. What evidence? Carter asked. The photos are gone. The investigation was closed. What do we have that a courtroom would care about? Constance stood up, crossed to an old filing cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a key. When you got hurt, she said to Alexandra, they returned your personal effects from the tunnel. Your coat, your bag, but you've been carrying your grandfather's old film camera that day, taking photos for a retro aesthetic article you were writing. Digital files disappear easy. Film is harder. I kept the camera in storage. Never got the film developed because you couldn't remember taking any photos that mattered. But if you took pictures before switching to your phone, if any of those frames caught something important, we might have physical evidence. The storage unit was in a building that smelled of mildew and old cardboard. The camera was exactly where Constance remembered, tucked in a box of Alexandra's college belongings. The film inside was 2 years expired and subjected to temperature changes that might have ruined it entirely. But Henry knew a guy who knew a guy, and by that evening, they had the film in a specialized lab with instructions to be extremely careful with the development. 3 days later, they got the results. Most of the roll was damaged. Images stray with light leaks and chemical degradation. But 4 frames had survived, and one of them, blurry but unmistakable, showed a man in a maintenance uniform pushing a dolly with 3 drums. The logo on the drums was clear enough to read, Ward Hazard Disposal. And in the background, visible through the tunnel's perspective, was a timestamp display from a safety monitor. The date and time matched the fire to within 10 minutes. This isn't proof of deliberate arson, Henry cautioned. It's proof that hazmat was in the tunnel when it shouldn't have been. But combined with the radio transcripts about chemical smells, combined with the secondary explosion, combined with how quickly the investigation got shut down, it tells a story, and stories matter. They scheduled the press conference for the following Monday, giving themselves time to prepare statements and notify media. Porter, risking his career, agreed to present the off-book investigation files. Amanda Cross agreed to discuss Alexandra's memory recovery from a medical perspective, validating the reliability of trauma-triggered recall. Henry compiled a timeline that showed the connections between Ward Holdings' subsidiaries, city contracts, and the convenient closure of the investigation. The night before the conference, someone spray-painted stop across the boarded-up window of Hale's Coffee. The black SUV made 3 slow passes. Carter, sitting in his apartment with Louisa, asleep in the next room, considered calling the whole thing off. It would be easier to move, to find a new city, to let the past stay buried. But then Louisa shuffled out of her room, rubbing her eyes. Dad, are you afraid of fire again? The question hit him in the chest. He had told her months ago, during a moment of honesty, about his old job, about the tunnel, about why he did not work as a firefighter anymore. He had tried to frame it as a choice, but children see more than adults give them credit for. She knew he was afraid a little bit, he admitted. But you know what? Sometimes being brave isn't about not being afraid. Sometimes it's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. She crawled into his lap. Too big for it really, but still his baby. Is the lady you help across the street going to be okay? I'm going to make sure she is, Carter said. Louisa nodded seriously. That's what heroes do. They keep helping even when it's hard. The word stayed with him through the sleepless night, through the morning preparations, through the moment he walked into Hale's Coffee and saw Alexandra setting up chairs for the media. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure, her wine-colored scarf wrapped tight around her neck like armor. Last chance to back out, he said quietly. She shook her head. I've been afraid for 2 years. Afraid to cross a street. Afraid of loud noises. afraid of my own broken memory. I'm done being afraid. Today, I choose to stand next to you in the light and tell the truth. The press conference began at 10 o'clock. Local news attended, curious about the mysterious invitation. A few bloggers and independent journalists showed up, always hungry for corruption stories. By the time Alexandra finished telling her story, speaking clearly about the tunnel fire, her amnesia, her returning memories, and the photographs she had taken, the room was silent with attention. Carter spoke next briefly about the rescue that night, about the partner he lost, about the secondary explosion that should not have happened if the fire was purely electrical. His voice cracked when he mentioned Marcus, and he did not hide it. Porter presented the investigation files, explaining in Copac how the case had been pulled, how evidence had gone missing, how pressure from above had resulted in a closure that left questions unanswered. He was risking his career by being there, and everyone in the room knew it. The film photograph was projected on the wall, grainy and damaged, but clear enough. The drums, the logo, the timestamp. Henry walked through the corporate connections, the shell companies, the patterns of Ward Holdings moving through gray legal areas in pursuit of profit. Then the door opened, and Clinton Enoch Ward himself walked in with two lawyers. He was 45, sharp-suited, radiating the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. "This is slander," he announced to the room. "My company has done nothing wrong. These people are trying to extort a settlement by creating a false narrative. We will be pursuing legal action." Alexandra stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Then pursue it in open court, where we can subpoena your waste disposal records, where we can depose your employees about what they were moving through that tunnel, where a jury can decide if cutting corners on hazmat disposal to save money was worth the 24 people who were injured that night, worth the one firefighter who died. Do it publicly, Mr. Ward. I dare you." The room erupted with questions from reporters. Ward's lawyers tried to pull him toward the door, but the damage was done. The story was out. Cameras had recorded everything. By that afternoon, it was trending online. By evening, the district attorney's office announced they were reopening the investigation into the Metro tunnel fire. The investigation took 3 months. Grand jury proceedings were sealed, but leaks suggested testimony from former Ward Holdings employees corroborating the illegal waste transportation. The insurance fraud came to light when investigators discovered Ward had purchased a specific policy for tunnel infrastructure incidents just 1 week before the fire. A policy that paid out handsomely when the city rushed to repair and reopen the tunnel. Ward was indicted on multiple counts: obstruction of justice, reckless endangerment, insurance fraud. His lawyers fought hard, but the story had taken on a life of its own. People remembered the tunnel fire. They remembered the fear. And now they had someone to blame. Constance, in her own small act of redemption, used the shop's savings and the returned settlement money to establish a fund for the other tunnel victims, many of whom had long-term medical issues and no one to sue. Carter and Alexandra testified at the preliminary hearing. Sitting in the witness box recounting that night, Carter felt the weight he had been carrying shift. Marcus' death had not been his fault. It had been the consequence of someone else's greed and negligence. The guilt did not disappear entirely, but it became manageable, integrated into his story rather than defining it. After the hearing, they walked back to the intersection where this had all started. The delivery truck still braked too hard. The crowd still surged across at the lights change, but Alexandra crossed without help, without panic, with Carter walking beside her instead of leading her. "I used to be so afraid here," she said. "But you helped me cross every day until I could remember why I was afraid. And then you helped me face it. That's what saved me, Carter. Not just pulling me out of the tunnel that night, but showing up every morning after, patient and kind until I was strong enough to remember and deal with it." They reopened Hale's Coffee with a new edition, the Second Cup program. Every morning, the second coffee of the day was prepaid and given free to whoever needed it. Strangers helping strangers. Kindness passed forward. On the wall, Louise's drawing hung in a simple frame. It showed 2 figures crossing an intersection at dawn, hand in hand, with a tunnel in the distance, lit up safe and bright. Porter received a formal reprimand for keeping unsanctioned copies of investigation files. But he also received a commendation for ultimately bringing forward evidence of corruption. The balance seemed fair. Henry started a community emergency preparedness program, teaching basic rescue skills to civilians. Carter co-taught the first aid sections, facing his past by helping others prepare for theirs. 6 months after the press conference, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Carter stopped at the intersection near Hale's Coffee. Alexandra was waiting, 2 cups already in hand. She passed him one. "Walk with me," she asked. They crossed the street together. No longer rescuer and rescued. No longer bound by trauma and investigation. Just 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light. Louisa, watching from the bus window, waved enthusiastically and added another heart to her map. The city moved around them, indifferent and eternal. But in that one corner, at that one intersection, something had changed. A truth had been told. A wrong had been righted, and 2 broken people had discovered that healing was not about forgetting the fire, but about learning to cross the street together morning after morning until the fear became just another memory alongside the courage. The message was simple, written in coffee cups, and keeping promises and showing up even when it was hard. Repeated small kindness was never truly anonymous. It was the thread that sewed shut the wounds, that bridged the gap between past and present, that gave people courage to speak truth even when truth was dangerous. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the stranger you helped cross the street turned out to be someone you had saved before. Someone who needed saving again in a different way. Someone who would stand beside you when it mattered most and say, "Today, let me walk with you." The sun climbed higher over the coastal city, burning off the morning fog, and the intersection filled and emptied with the rhythm of 1,000 ordinary days. But some days, some ordinary days, become the foundation for extraordinary change. This was one of those days built on the ashes of a fire 2 years past, constructed from memory and courage, and a simple act of crossing a street together. This was the day the story ended and the healing truly began.